Hello, and thanks for joining us for another Board of Education meeting recap, this time for the month of October 2021. I'm J.D. Harden, Executive Director of Media and Public Relations, and we're so glad you could join us. We're doing things a little bit different this month as we review the major topics that were shared during this month's Board of Education meetings, and we're going to talk now about a report that was shared by Superintendent Davis about the strategic plan and where Henry County Schools currently sits with its efforts over this next 5 years to really bring this strategic plan to life. As a part of this plan, it really has to go back to 2017, where the foundation was laid to help Henry County Schools get to a solid space where we could now move forward ambitiously on this strategic plan. Superintendent Davis was able to report before the board a little bit about where we've been, where we are now, and where we're going. And as a part of that, again, she was able to reference, the stressors of COVID-19 and the impact it's had on our efforts to bring this strategic plan to life. And the report really was robust and full of information that we think you'd be interested in. So let's take a listen.
Today, I will take the opportunity to provide the board a report regarding the progress that's been made on the strategic plan. Really, this community-inspired strategic plan has actually fallen subject to all the strains and pains I was just mentioning in the welcome. COVID created a reality in our community, and that reality, of course, has caused us to put our foot on the gas pedal and then on the brake about a bazillion times. But the reality is, we currently have our third graduating class and our third group of kindergartners who have had a portion, if not all, of their school year with some level of disruption or impact related to COVID. So this report provides an overview of the reality of planning for this future for our children before their future actually gets here. So I'm going to jump to the slide that we start all of our conversations starting with. And there's a reason we start all of our conversations right here. It is because of our commitment to the work of Henry County Schools being aligned from the community to the boardroom to the classroom. Who we are and where we are headed is clear. And it's built on a depth of work that has really been produced by this Board of Education right here. We call this slide our compass for a reason. Our compass has always pointed to our true north, and that has always been students. So I want to just dissect this just for a moment to acknowledge that this compass in its completion represents a foundation that is built on beliefs and policies really just define the DNA and infrastructure of an organization. And our future is found in our community-inspired strategic plan and divided into strategic actions and priority outcomes. So let's look at this strong and stable foundation that really is found in those beliefs and in those policies. And as we've said 1,000 times, a high-performing school district starts with a high-performing Board of Education. And 4 years ago, this Board of Education set out to listen to teachers and to leaders and to school professionals in every job family. They listened to parents and they listened to students, and they heard very clearly, as did I, that consistency of practice from school to school and improved student performance outcomes for kids were urgently on their mind. There was actually a desire 4 years ago for clarity about what we teach, a desire from parents to understand how their children were performing through the grade reporting and the promotion and retention decisions that were made. There was a desire for an investment in instructional resources from school to school that would be in the hands of teachers and in the hands of families and include a component of print. And there was a desire to try to get away from what was called platform fatigue at the time, to have a one-stop shop of digital resources. That, among many other things, is what led our Board of Education to these beliefs and policies that you see on the screen today. And really, the role of the Board of Education is through policy. And the policy is what creates the conditions for the district, for all 52 schools in the district, to share a solid, stable, reliable, and well-defined foundation. And while policies may not always draw the celebration that they deserve, in my opinion, policies are how boards do create these conditions. And if we want to have a guarantee to our public that the best possible place for a child to learn, and to our educators that the best possible place to work is in Henry County, it can't be left to chance. So the focus of our work as a district from boardroom to classroom became laser focused right around what you see on the screen right here. And the aligned system of teaching and learning, that was one of the earliest components of policy BAB. It included clarity around what we will teach, now known as the Henry Teaching and Learning Standards. That's what we teach in Henry County Schools, and parents can find the Henry Teaching and Learning Standards posted on our district website so they can see exactly what guides our teachers' planning, lesson development, and instruction. We also teach at a pace that ensures every child has the opportunity to learn an entire course of grade level content every year, as required by state law and as expected by this board. And that we will plan to use tightly aligned and district-adopted instructional resources. And those resources can also be found on our district website for families or for community members who would like to see the resources deployed in Henry County Schools. We've also committed to monitoring that students are indeed learning and using evidence-based interventions when there's indications that they may not be. You see, these board-adopted policies have been coupled with an investment in resources, and they create the conditions for students to learn at high levels. And this is all part of the Henry County guarantee that you can rely on a strong and stable education foundation. But then the board, after investing in the foundation, set out to build an ambitious future, only possible once you have a stable and clear foundation. And this ambitious future is now defined by the strategic plan, and it did include so many voices, teachers, leaders, other staff members and job families that support instruction and support student services. We heard from community members and parents, and we heard from other elected officials from other agencies. But this worldwide pandemic has certainly put our foundation and the opportunity to pursue this future under a good bit of stress. And it's given us this feeling of off again, on again, off again, on again, in order to get any momentum around preparing for the future. So we've leaned heavily on this foundation that the board created. We actually leaned really heavily on this foundation when we moved to remote teaching, and then when we had hybrid teaching, and now in the season that I've coined crisis perseverance. But I also believe this board's foundation was a differentiator for Henry County Schools educators and our families. Imagine on March 16th of 2020 if students did not go home with core instructional resources and a device. Imagine if there were no print resources to be checked out. Imagine if the report cards varied from school to school and classroom to classroom. And imagine if we did not have clear teaching and learning standards for our grade levels, as well as a common pace as we built our summer learning loss programs, the bridge program for students who are assigned quarantine, and navigated so many of the twists and turns this season has demanded. And while we've nurtured our strategic plan, we surely have not gotten any momentum, nor have we had the opportunity to build excitement around this ambitious, community-inspired 5 years ahead. So I draw your attention to a few things you may be interested in on the website if you're curious about how we've nurtured by introducing the timeline and pace of all of the initiatives that will be implemented over the next 5 years, and how our board has started to look at 5-year goals. But really, quite frankly, it's really been the last to get attention after we take care of what's been essential in this season of operating schools. So as I think about our foundation being tested and our future being uncertain, you can't help but wonder, what is the role of schools in all of that? And you know, I've said this several times. I've coined March 2020 to June 2020 as crisis response. We were all figuring it out. How are we going to close schools? How are we going to graduate kids? How are we going to get kids across the stage? How are we going to promote? How are we going to retain? How are we going to do grades? All the things that came upon us in March of 2020. But really, when students walked across that stage at AMS, it really felt like we also turned a page. It became crisis management. We knew the cards we were dealt, and now it's going to be time for us to actually manage those really, really well. And as we prepared for a new school year, I believe we turned another page when we opened our doors for in-person learning in September 2020. And that's when it became crisis leadership. And of course, you know this, we were open for an in-person learning experience for 85% of the school year last year. That is more than any metro Atlanta district. And that required a ton of leadership from every single person in every single job family. And then it became what I now call crisis perseverance. We really didn't want to have to do all of this again, but it was exactly what we were called to do. And so for the first time after 18 months, well, I guess at that time, like 15 months, we introduced something called emergency management plans that have now been in place for 50 days. Today, I believe we have approached the appropriate day to suspend the role of emergency management plans for the organization, with the following lessons having been learned. First, the employee investments made by this Board of Education will stay intact. It has resulted in 24 new bus drivers hired and more that are in process, 18 new bus monitors, 16 new school nutrition employees, and 6 new clinic aides. We went from a low of 39% substitute fill rate to a high of 69% in our fill rate, and we are now averaging right around 60%, still below the 80% fill rate of our pre-COVID times, but certainly better than 39%. The early school opening at each of our levels will remain intact until further notice, but when we can retire our early opening, we will begin introducing a before the bell program for our middle schools only to allow families to have the same ASEP experience, but now in middle school, before school, for supervised before school programming for middle school students. At the same time as the emergency management plans, we introduced 3 critical objectives, and we reoriented the entire organization to the requirements associated with keeping schools open, students and employees safe, and managing a reliable COVID positive protocol. It introduced the East team, which was non-school-based employees serving in roles and positions that were essential for schools to be open. That included before and after school supervision, food service support, ASEP staffing, and substitute staffing, including our specialized special education units and our general education classrooms at all levels. There was also a call center stood up for transportation services, and they managed a massive volume, and we have learned is something we will continue in future school opening seasons. But now we add a 4th critical objective, and that 4th critical objective is coming at a time when it appears we're approaching a valley of COVID's presence in our community, and it really is this moment where we affirm the foundation of our core business. That's our 4th critical objective. Has our core business withstood the stress of these past 18 months? Does there need to be an investment in resources such as professional development or coaching or instructional resources? This is not about new work. Instead, we would be naive. Actually, we'd be irresponsible if we did not pause and ensure that the systems designed to ensure that teachers have what they need to teach, the clarity, the resources that they need, and families and students have what they need to learn, has remained intact, strong, stable, and ready for the future to be built upon it. I would have preferred not to experience this level of a test, but this is when we get to ensure that we really do come through this stronger. Because our core business of student learning is not something we just put on a piece of paper. It's a collective commitment. It defines how we act, how we operate, how we prioritize, and how we grow. So as I think about our next steps and I approach wrapping up this report, I recognize that between October and December, we have this affirming of our foundation that we are purposefully reflecting upon and reinvesting in. We also now need to begin sharing our community-inspired strategic plan with stakeholders, and we'll begin doing that in school council meetings and in community environments. And then as January approaches, that's when we will begin the customized, cluster, and even school-specific strategic plan implementation timelines. Now, everyone really just wants to know, when is my school getting robotics equipment? And when will STEM labs be installed in elementary schools? And when will world languages begin? And when will we have growth and replacement for our furniture and equipment in classrooms? All of this gets answered in our strategic plan, and every school will have a slightly different variation of when the timeline is right for their school or for their cluster. But it is only going to be possible if the extraordinary leadership of our strategic plan is found in the people of our community excited to deliver even grander things for our kids. So as I think about what lies ahead and the acknowledgement that we will continue to prepare for future COVID surges, we will lead with reckless ambition during the seasons that our children are waiting on more from us and for us. So as we keep kids at our center and embrace a commitment to getting better every day for every single one of our young people. So, Madam Chair, as I close, I want to just conclude with this quote by Stanley McChrystal, that an organization must be constantly led or, if necessary, pushed uphill toward what must be. Stop pushing, and it doesn't continue or even rest in place. It rolls backward. This board has never made an excuse over this past 18 months, and we know that won't start now. So with our most remarkable educators, we are ready for what is next. Madam Chair, that concludes what I have prepared, and I turn it back over to you.
While this is just a monthly recap of the Board of Education meetings, you can find the full-length version by visiting our website or clicking on the links in the description section below.